Billionaire disguised as a janitor to test his employees. They didn't know his true face would fire them all. The hushed anticipation in the grand ballroom of the Ethelred Holdings flagship skyscraper was palpable, a thinly veiled tension beneath the polished veneer of corporate decorum. The scent of expensive coffee mingled with the faint, sterile aroma of cleaning agents, a subtle olfactory clash that mirrored the deeper divisions within the company. On the main stage, a gleaming projection displayed quarterly profits, numbers that soared beyond any previous projections, a dazzling array of green arrows pointing relentlessly upwards. Regina Thorne, the impeccably dressed chief operating officer, a woman whose tailored suits always seemed to reflect the sharp edges of her ambition, stood beside a beaming Caspian Sterling. Caspian, Augusta Sterling's grandnephew, a young man whose charm was as superficial as the gleam on his designer watch, basked in the admiring gazes of the board members and key executives. They were celebrating, ostensibly, a monumental financial triumph, yet the whispers that circulated among the lower-level staff told a different, more chilling tale, a triumph built on the quiet erosion of employee benefits, particularly the long-cherished pension plans for the very people who kept the company running day by day. And so, Regina's voice, sharp and precise, cut through the murmurs, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Her words, meticulously chosen, carried the weight of calculated power. We project an unprecedented surge in shareholder value, thanks to our strategic restructuring of certain overheads. Her eyes, cold and calculating, briefly flickered towards a figure diligently wiping down a distant glass partition, an elderly janitor, seemingly invisible amidst the corporate elite. A flicker of disdain, quickly masked, crossed her features. Efficiency, after all, is the cornerstone of true success. Some might call it ruthless, but we call it necessary evolution. A few sycophantic chuckles rippled through the room, thin and brittle like old ice. Caspian, ever the showman, leaned into the microphone, his smile widening, revealing teeth almost too perfect. Indeed. The old ways, the old burdens, if you will, simply no longer serve the modern enterprise. We must be lean, we must be agile. And some, he added, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, a smirk that suggested a profound lack of empathy, are simply not agile enough to keep up. His gaze, too, briefly swept over the janitor, Arthur, whose back was turned, seemingly engrossed in his task. The young man's words hung in the air, dripping with an arrogance born of unearned privilege, a blatant disregard for the very people whose sweat and loyalty had built the foundation upon which he so carelessly stood. Arthur, his back aching, a dull throb that had become a constant companion over the past weeks, his hands calloused from weeks of relentless scrubbing, straightened slowly, the squeak of his cleaning cart barely audible in the vast hall. His disheveled gray hair, once meticulously combed, now fell haphazardly across his brow, a deliberate part of his carefully constructed disguise. He looked every inch the forgotten, aged servant, a relic of a bygone era. His overalls, stained and worn, spoke of countless hours of thankless labor. Yet, within those weary eyes, a fire smoldered, a calculated resolve that neither Regina nor Caspian could ever comprehend, a depth of purpose they were incapable of seeing. He listened, truly listened, to their callous pronouncements, their veiled jabs at the very people they deemed expendable, feeling the bitter sting of their words like a personal affront. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of the company he had painstakingly built. Then, Arthur coughed, a soft, deliberate sound, surprisingly clear, that nonetheless seemed to echo loudly in the suddenly quiet room. It was not a cough of infirmity, but one of profound intent. All eyes, initially annoyed at the interruption, turned towards him. Regina's brow furrowed, a faint line of irritation marring her otherwise perfect composure. "Is there an issue, Arthur?" she asked, her tone laced with thinly veiled impatience, as if a servant daring to exist was an unforgivable offense. "We're in a critical discussion here." Arthur, the supposed janitor, stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate, each step a carefully weighed decision. He held a crumpled, stained rag in one hand, an ordinary object that would soon become a symbol of extraordinary revelation. "An issue, ma'am?" he rasped, his voice surprisingly clear despite its age, shedding the feigned frailty he had adopted. Indeed, there is. A very significant issue, I'd say. He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep over the faces of the assembled executives, lingering on Regina and Caspian, watching their expressions shift from annoyance to slight bewilderment. It appears, the game is finally over. A ripple of confusion, then suppressed sniggers, broke the silence. A few executives exchanged amused glances, clearly convinced they were witnessing a senile outburst. Caspian chuckled, a derisive sound, a laugh filled with contempt. "Arthur, with all due respect, I think you've had a bit too much industrial strength cleaner. Perhaps you should take a break." Regina simply narrowed her eyes, her hand subtly reaching for her phone, no doubt to summon security, already formulating a mental note to have him quietly dismissed after the meeting. Arthur, however, simply smiled, a peculiar, knowing smile that sent an inexplicable shiver down a few spines, unsettling those who were sensitive enough to perceive the hidden meaning. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice gaining a quiet authority that belied his appearance, an authority that resonated with the weight of years of command, "I've seen quite enough. And it is precisely because of what I've seen that I can now state, with absolute certainty, the truth, it seems, has finally come to clean house." The executives exchanged bewildered glances, still uncertain if they were witnessing a senile outburst or something far more profound, something that prickled at the edges of their comfortable reality. They had no idea that the man before them, the very person they had so casually dismissed and ridiculed, held their entire futures in his arthritic hands. The true face of Augustus Sterling, the founder of their empire, was about to be revealed, and with it, the reckoning they so richly deserved. Augustus Sterling, at 72 years old, had long been an enigma to many. The reclusive founder of Ethelred Holdings, a global conglomerate whose tentacles stretched from opulent luxury resorts to cutting-edge tech, he had built his empire on a foundation of innovation and, crucially, a deep-seated belief in the value of every individual, from the CEO to the lowliest janitor. His early days had been marked by a relentless work ethic and an uncompromising ethical code. He had always believed that a company was only as strong as its weakest link, and that meant fostering loyalty, nurturing talent, and ensuring the well-being of all who contributed to its success. He had personally known the names of the first 100 employees, their families, their dreams. His success was not just financial, it was built on a community, a shared vision. Yet, in recent years, a creeping malaise had begun to infect the very heart of Ethelred. It began subtly, with reports of slight dips in employee satisfaction surveys, quickly dismissed by executives as minor statistical anomalies. Then came the whispers, carried on the wind of disgruntled former employees, of ruthless corporate maneuvering by his top executives and even, more disturbingly, by his own family members. He heard tales of long-term employees being summarily dismissed without cause, their years of service evaporating with a single, cold notice. Promises of advancement were broken, replaced by empty platitudes. There was a chilling shift from a people-first philosophy to one of unbridled profit at any cost, a philosophy that seemed to mock the very principles he had founded the company upon. Augustus, with his keen, analytical mind, understood that these were not mere isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a deeper rot, a cancerous greed that threatened to consume the very soul of the company he had painstakingly built. He had always trusted his executives, particularly those he had personally mentored, seeing in them echoes of his own ambition and integrity. He had certainly trusted his family, especially his grandnephew, Caspian, whom he had envisioned as a potential heir to a portion of his legacy, a young man who he hoped would carry forward the torch of Ethelred's values. But the reports, coupled with an increasing feeling of disconnection from the day-to-day realities of his vast enterprise, gnawed at him. He felt like a king in a gilded cage, cut off from the true pulse of his kingdom, reliant solely on filtered, often self-serving, information. His secluded estate, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison of his own making, isolating him from the truths he desperately needed to uncover. He had tried the conventional routes, patiently at first, commissioning internal audits, requesting detailed reports, even holding impromptu meetings with various department heads. But each time, the narrative presented to him was meticulously crafted, showcasing a gleaming, efficient machine, devoid of the human cost he suspected was being paid. The executives, adept at corporate politicking, presented data that supported their narrative, carefully omitting any inconvenient truths. Charts glowed with projected savings, while the human stories behind those numbers remained hidden. His grandnephew, Caspian, with his charming but superficial demeanor, would always assure him that everything was running smoothly. Uncle, even as Augustus sensed a growing hollowness behind his eyes, a glint of something insincere that unsettled him. There was no real concern in Caspian's reassurances, only a practiced performance. It was this profound disillusionment, this gnawing suspicion that his life's work was being corrupted from within, that spurred Augustus to an audacious, almost theatrical, plan. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes, unfiltered by reports or executive spin. He needed to become invisible, to blend into the very fabric of the company's lowest echelons, where the true character of those in power would be revealed, unburdened by the need to impress the founder. It was a desperate measure, born of a desperate need to reclaim his company's soul. The idea of going undercover, of disguising himself as a janitor, was born from a sudden, almost whimsical thought during a restless night, but it quickly solidified into a meticulously crafted strategy. He spent weeks preparing. He had a team of trusted, long-term personal staff, sworn to absolute secrecy, help him. Alastair Finch, his stoic and utterly loyal head of legal, was the first confidant, his expression one of initial shock quickly replaced by unwavering determination. His personal chef, a woman who had known him for 40 years, helped him adjust his diet to mimic the meager meals of a low-wage worker, ensuring his body would adapt to the physical strain. They created a new identity for him, Arthur, an elderly, disheveled, slightly hard-of-hearing man in his early 70s, seeking a humble, late-career employment. Fake IDs were procured through a network Finch activated, a modest apartment in a less affluent part of the city was rented, a small, cramped space so different from his sprawling estate, and a simple, worn wardrobe was assembled, each piece carefully distressed to look genuinely used. He even studied janitorial manuals, practicing basic cleaning techniques, perfecting the stoop and the weary gait of a man who had spent a lifetime on his feet, simulating the aches and pains. He wanted to be utterly convincing, to be truly invisible, a ghost in the gleaming corporate machine. The transformation was physical, but also profoundly psychological, forcing him to shed decades of privilege and embrace humility. His goal was simple: to observe. To observe the true character of those he trusted, particularly Regina and Caspian, to see if their ruthlessness was merely ambition or something far more sinister. To uncover the hidden rot he suspected was growing within his empire, fueled by greed and a shocking disregard for human dignity. He would become the fly on the wall, the ghost in the machine, the silent witness to the unfolding drama of his own company. He knew the risk was immense, the emotional toll potentially devastating, for he might discover truths that would shatter his perceptions of people he once held dear. But the alternative, allowing his legacy to be tainted by the very people he had empowered, allowing Ethelred to become a hollow shell of its former self, was simply unthinkable. He sought to find the truth, knowing full well it might shatter the illusion he had so carefully constructed for his life's work. The first few weeks as Arthur were a brutal education for Augustus. The physical demands of the job were far greater than he had anticipated. His muscles, accustomed to a life of intellectual pursuits and occasional leisurely strolls, screamed in protest from the endless sweeping, mopping, and lifting. The hours were long, stretching into the late evenings, and the pay meager, a stark contrast to the millions that flowed through the company's coffers. But it was the constant, subtle dehumanization, the casual disregard for his presence, that truly opened his eyes. He moved through the gleaming corridors of Ethelred Holdings, a phantom in faded overalls, observing, listening, absorbing. Executives would stride past him without a glance, mid-level managers would bark orders over his head, never acknowledging him as a person. He became a fixture, an object, an extension of the building's infrastructure, and the anonymity was both a blessing for his mission and a chilling revelation of humanity's capacity for indifference. and what he saw sickened him to his core. His first significant encounter with the rot came during a routine cleaning of the executive floor. He was quietly mopping a section near Regina Thorne's office. The rhythmic swish of the mop had a solitary sound in the otherwise hushed corridor, when the sharp, clipped tones of her voice pierced the relative silence. She was berating Martha, an older, dedicated cleaner who had been with Ethelred for nearly 20 years, a woman known for her meticulousness and quiet efficiency. Martha, her shoulders hunched, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, was nervously trying to wipe away a faint coffee ring on a polished conference table, a ring that was barely visible to the naked eye. "Are you utterly incompetent, Martha?" Regina's voice dripped with disdain, loud enough to carry through the open office door, a harsh, public humiliation. "This is a high-traffic area, a showcase for our clients. And you leave a stain like this? Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain these surfaces? Your carelessness is costing the company money, money that could be better spent on, say, actual productive employees." Her words were a whip, lashing at the older woman, stripping away her dignity with each syllable. Martha's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with suppressed emotion. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thorne. I thought I had gotten it all. I'll redo it immediately." "No, you won't," Regina snapped, her voice cold as ice. "You'll consider your position, Martha. This kind of sloppiness is simply unacceptable. We can't afford to carry dead weight, especially in these crucial times. One more incident, and I assure you, your long tenure here will come to an abrupt end. Do you understand?" The implicit threat of losing her pension, her retirement security, hung heavy in the air. Augustus, his heart pounding in his chest, a surge of cold fury rising within him, felt a profound sense of outrage. Martha, a loyal and hard-working individual, a woman who had quietly served Ethelred for 2 decades, was being publicly humiliated and threatened over a triviality, a barely perceptible coffee ring. He saw Martha's eyes well up with tears as she nodded, her dignity stripped away, her spirit crushed. He wanted to intervene, to remind Regina of Martha's decades of service, of the company's foundational values, of the respect due to every human being, but he held his tongue, forcing himself to remain Arthur, the invisible janitor. He simply continued to mop, his gaze fixed on the floor, yet every word burned into his memory, fueling the fire of his resolve. A few days later, the contempt of Caspian Sterling became glaringly apparent. Augustus was pushing his cleaning cart past the company gym when he saw Caspian, fresh from a workout, beckon over George, an elderly security guard, a man whose uniform was always impeccably pressed, and who carried himself with quiet pride despite the weight of his years. George had guarded the Ethelred premises for nearly 35 years, a testament to his unwavering loyalty, his face etched with the lines of a life dedicated to service. "George!" Caspian called out, a patronizing tone in his voice, as if speaking to a slow-witted child. "Come here, old-timer. I need a favor." George, his movements a little stiff from standing long hours, hurried over, his brow furrowed with a desire to please. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "My car, the new convertible." Caspian gestured vaguely towards the parking lot, as if the request was the most natural thing in the world. "It's looking a bit dull. I want you to give it a good polish. Top to bottom. And quickly. I have a lunch meeting." He tossed George a set of keys, which jingled dismissively. "And after that, run down to my office and fetch me a fresh, chilled protein shake from my mini-fridge. The blueberry one. Don't dawdle." George hesitated, his sense of duty conflicting with the audacious demand. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, my duties are here, securing the building." Caspian cut him off with a dismissive wave, his face hardening. "Are you questioning me, George? Or are you simply too slow to understand a simple instruction? Perhaps your eyesight isn't what it used to be. Look, you either do as I say, or I'll find someone who actually wants to be useful. There are plenty of younger, more capable people who would kill for your job." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, a venomous threat. Do you want to lose that comfortable pension, George? The one you've been counting on for your retirement? George's face fell, the pride draining from his features, and he nodded, taking the keys with a trembling hand, his spirit visibly shrinking under the weight of the younger man's cruelty. As he shuffled away, his shoulders slumped. Augustus, cleaning a nearby window, saw the shame etched on the old guard's face, a profound indignity. He wanted to roar, to expose Caspian's petty tyranny, to remind him of the respect due to an elder, but he remained Arthur, a silent witness to the casual cruelty of his own grandnephew. He saw George meticulously polish the luxury car, buffing every inch until it gleamed, then return, panting slightly, with the protein shake, only to be met with a dismissive grunt from Caspian, who barely even looked at him. The disgust curdled in Augustus's stomach, a bitter bile that threatened to choke him. The final, and most damning, revelation came late one evening. Augustus was performing a deep clean of the executive lounge, a plush space typically empty after hours, when he overheard Regina and Caspian's voices from a nearby, seemingly empty conference room. They had evidently left the door slightly ajar, a careless oversight in their hubris, and were engrossed in a discussion, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet building, echoing with their vile intentions. The board approval for the pension restructuring will sail through, Regina stated, a note of triumph in her voice, a predatory gleam in her tone. I've massaged the numbers just right. It will look like a necessary cost-cutting measure, essential for long-term sustainability. The shareholders will practically applaud our foresight. And our bonuses? Caspian's voice was eager, almost salivating, betraying the depth of his greed. Regina chuckled, a dry, humorless sound, devoid of warmth. Oh, they will be substantial, my dear Caspian. By trimming the fat from those long-term, low-wage employees' pension plans, we free up a considerable sum. They've been here for decades, taking up valuable resources, living off the company's goodwill. They won't know what hit them until it's too late. A few vague clauses in the new agreements, a bit of legal jargon, and poof. Their golden parachutes turn into lead weights. They have no power, no leverage. They're expendable. Her callousness was breathtaking. Excellent, Caspian purred, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. So, more for us, less for them. The perfect corporate strategy. Simple, elegant, and immensely profitable. Augustus, hunched behind a large potted plant, its leaves providing a meager shield, felt a cold dread settle in his heart, quickly replaced by a white-hot rage that threatened to consume him. This was it. This was the hidden rot he had sought, laid bare in all its repulsive glory. They were not just dismissive, not just arrogant, they were actively conspiring to rob the very people who had dedicated their lives to Ethelred, all to line their own pockets. The legacy he had built on integrity, on the principle of shared prosperity, was being systematically dismantled by the very people he had entrusted with its future. The betrayal was complete. Yet, amidst this chilling moral decay, a flicker of light consistently pierced the darkness. Alara, a young intern, no older than 22, was a stark contrast to the avarice and callousness that surrounded her. Augustus first noticed her when he was struggling to move a particularly heavy recycling bin, its contents clanking loudly. His back, already protesting, strained with the effort. Alara, hurrying past, her arms laden with files, stopped, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Oh, Arthur, that looks heavy," she said, her voice genuinely kind, devoid of the usual dismissive tone he had grown accustomed to. "Let me help you with that." Before he could protest, before he could even form a response, she had dropped her files, grabbed the other side of the bin, her small frame straining, but her smile unwavering. "There, much better, right?" Her kindness was spontaneous, uncalculated. Another time, during a particularly busy day, Augustus was feeling the pangs of hunger. He had forgotten his lunch, a simple sandwich he had prepared in his modest apartment, and the cafeteria line was impossibly long, snaking through the bustling hall. He felt a weariness settle deep in his bones, a longing for something warm and nourishing. Alara, noticing his tired slump, his gaze fixed on the distant cafeteria, approached him with a small paper bag. "Arthur," she said softly, her eyes gentle, "I accidentally made an extra sandwich today, and I have more coffee than I can possibly drink. Would you like to have it? It's just a simple turkey and cheese, but it's fresh." Her eyes were earnest, devoid of pity, just simple human kindness, a pure offering. He accepted, touched by her thoughtfulness, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. She always greeted him, often the only one to do so, with a polite "Good morning, Arthur," or "How are you today, Arthur?" She never treated him as invisible, never looked through him as if he were merely a piece of furniture. She would engage him in brief, polite conversations, asking about his day, or if he needed anything, her questions genuine. One afternoon, he overheard her gently explaining a complex software issue to an older administrative assistant who was struggling, her patience seemingly endless, her tone respectful, never condescending, never making the other person feel foolish. Alara was not wealthy, nor was she exceptionally powerful within the company hierarchy. She was just an intern, navigating her own early career struggles, trying to find her footing in a competitive world, yet she possessed a profound empathy, a genuine respect for human dignity that seemed utterly absent in the upper echelons of Ethelred. She saw Arthur, not as a janitor, but as a person, an individual worthy of respect and kindness. This profound contrast, the stark dichotomy between the cold, calculating greed of his family and executives, and the genuine, unasked-for compassion of a lowly intern, solidified Augustus's resolve. He had found the rot, yes, but he had also found a rare, untainted sprout of goodness. The test was over. The time for the grand reveal had come. The day of the annual shareholder meeting arrived, a date etched into Augustus's memory, a day he had meticulously prepared for, every detail planned down to the second. It was here, in the very ballroom where Regina and Caspian had reveled in their false triumph, that the mask would finally fall. The air crackled with anticipation, a mix of corporate ambition and veiled anxieties. The shareholders, dressed in their finest, buzzed with expectation. Regina Thorne stood at the podium, her voice resonating with confidence as she began her presentation on the strategic financial realignment, a euphemism for the pension fund cuts, her words dripping with self-congratulation. Caspian Sterling sat in the front row, a smug smile plastered on his face, occasionally nodding in agreement with Regina's pronouncements, his eyes darting around the room, savoring the attention. They believed they had won. They believed their carefully constructed facade of corporate brilliance was impenetrable, their deception seamless. Arthur, the seemingly invisible janitor, was positioned near the main entrance, ostensibly tidying a display of corporate brochures, his heart pounding a steady, resolute drumbeat in his chest, a mixture of nerves and righteous fury. He watched Regina's lips move, her words painting a picture of fiscal responsibility while subtly condemning the outdated expectations of long-term employees. He saw the flicker of agreement in the eyes of many shareholders, swayed by the promise of increased dividends, blinded by the lure of profit. As Regina paused for applause, taking a delicate sip of water from a crystal glass, Arthur slowly began to move. He pushed his cleaning cart, its wheels creaking slightly, a sound that seemed amplified in the expectant quiet, towards the center of the ballroom. A few heads turned, annoyed by the interruption, their gazes dismissive. Regina frowned, her eyes flashing a warning, a silent command for him to retreat. "Arthur, this is highly inappropriate," she hissed, her voice low but sharp, barely concealing her irritation. "Return to your duties. Now." Arthur simply continued, his gaze fixed on Regina, his eyes unwavering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet, the very one he had been given when he first started this charade. He opened it, revealing not a janitor's ID, but a platinum-embossed card, bearing the distinct Ethelred Holdings founder's seal. He held it up, allowing the subtle sheen to catch the light, reflecting the stunned faces of the audience. "My duties, Miss Thorne," he said, his voice now devoid of its former rasp, clear and resonant, filling the vast hall with an authority that had been hidden for weeks, "are far more extensive than you could possibly imagine. Confusion rippled through the audience, a wave of murmurs and bewildered glances. Caspian half rose from his seat, a bewildered expression on his face, his smug smile replaced by a look of utter perplexity. "Arthur, what in the blazes are you doing? Do you want to be fired? This is ridiculous." Arthur chuckled, a sound that held both amusement and deep, chilling irony, a sound that would haunt Caspian for years to come. "Fired, Mr. Sterling? How quaint." With a deliberate movement, he reached up, and with surprising strength, pulled off the disheveled gray wig that had concealed his perfectly groomed, silver hair, which gleamed under the ballroom lights. He then peeled away the layers of subtle makeup and prosthetics that had aged his face, revealing the sharp, intelligent eyes, the firm jawline, and the unmistakable countenance of Augustus Sterling, the reclusive founder of Ethelred Holdings. His transformation was complete. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom, a sound like a sudden intake of breath from hundreds of people. Whispers erupted, escalating into a roar of disbelief, then stunned silence. Regina's face went ashen, her jaw dropping, the crystal water glass slipping from her trembling fingers to shatter on the stage floor, its shards scattering like her shattered composure. Caspian, his smug smile vanishing entirely, slumped back into his seat, his eyes wide with terror, his face drained of all color, utterly speechless, his privileged world collapsing around him. Augustus Sterling stood before them, no longer the disheveled janitor, but a titan of industry, his presence commanding, his gaze unwavering, emanating an aura of cold fury. Behind him, almost as if on cue, his personal legal team, led by his most trusted counsel, Mr. Alastair Finch, entered the ballroom, briefcases in hand, their expressions grim and determined. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Augustus said, his voice booming with authority, silencing the clamor, his words echoing with profound disappointment. Or perhaps, I should say, good day to those who believed themselves untouchable. His eyes, filled with a cold fury, swept over Regina and Caspian, lingering on their horrified faces. "For weeks, I have walked among you, not as your chairman, but as Arthur, the janitor. I have witnessed, firsthand, the true character of those I entrusted with my legacy, the true nature of their greed." He pointed directly at Regina, his finger a precise, accusatory dart. "Miss Thorne, I witnessed your cruel and public humiliation of Martha, a loyal employee of 20 years, over a trivial coffee stain, threatening her livelihood for your own perverse sense of power, for the sheer pleasure of exercising your authority over the vulnerable." His finger then swung to Caspian, his voice heavy with the weight of familial disappointment. "And you, Caspian? I watched as you forced George, a dedicated security guard for 3.5 decades, to perform demeaning personal errands, mocking his age and threatening his pension, simply to stroke your inflated ego, to prove your petty dominance." A stunned, terrifying silence filled the room. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. "But the most egregious offense," Augustus continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, a chilling undertone of absolute certainty, "the ultimate betrayal, was hearing you both conspire to gut the pension plans of the very employees who built this company from the ground up, the loyal, hard-working individuals who dedicated their lives to Ethelred, all to inflate your own bonuses. You called them expendable. You called them burdens. You truly believed no one was watching, did you not? That your greed and callousness would remain hidden in the shadows, that your deceit would go unpunished." He gestured to Mr. Finch, who stepped forward, opening a briefcase with a crisp click. "Mr. Finch has prepared all the necessary documentation. Effective immediately, Regina Thorne, your employment with Ethelred Holdings is terminated, with cause, and all your corporate assets, including your ill-gotten bonuses, are frozen pending a full forensic audit and legal action for gross misconduct and fiduciary irresponsibility. You have stolen from the very heart of this company." Regina let out a strangled cry, her face contorting in horror, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, the cold efficiency she once prided herself on now turned against her. And Caspian Sterling, Augustus's voice was laced with profound disappointment, a deep sorrow for a lost hope. "Your future with this company, and indeed, any inheritance from my estate, is hereby irrevocably severed. Every privilege you have enjoyed, every penny you have taken for granted, is gone. You will be escorted from these premises and will never set foot here again. My legacy, it seems, is not merely a means to fuel an opulent lifestyle, but a testament to integrity, a concept you clearly failed to grasp, a value you utterly disregarded. Caspian stumbled to his feet, a horrified, disbelieving look on his face, his lips moving but no sound escaping. Uncle Augustus, you can't, this is insane. This is madness. It is not insane, Caspian, Augustus stated, his voice now filled with a quiet, resolute power, a calm that belied the storm within. It is justice. And it is merely the beginning. The security team, no longer confused, their faces grim but understanding, moved forward, ready to carry out their founder's unprecedented orders. The masks had fallen, and the true reckoning had begun. The immediate aftermath of Augustus Sterling's spectacular revelation sent shockwaves not only through Ethelred Holdings but across the entire corporate world. The news, sensational and dramatic, spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and becoming the subject of countless industry discussions. The billionaire janitor became a modern legend, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and break rooms alike. Augustus knew the ripple effect would be immense, far beyond the confines of his own company. For Regina Thorne, the fallout was swift and brutal. Escorted out of the meeting in a daze, her initial shock quickly gave way to desperate denial, then frantic attempts to salvage her reputation. Her carefully crafted network of corporate allies evaporated overnight. Her phone, once a constant source of calls, fell silent. But Augustus had been thorough. The legal team, led by Alistair Finch, launched an immediate and comprehensive forensic audit of her financial dealings within the company. Evidence of illicit bonuses, questionable expense reports, and active manipulation of financial data to benefit herself at the expense of employee welfare quickly mounted. Her carefully constructed image of a ruthless but effective COO crumbled into dust, exposed as nothing more than a thinly veiled mask for avarice. Lawsuits from disgruntled employees, emboldened by Augustus's stand and the legal team's assistance, began to pile up, each one a testament to her cruelty. Her assets were frozen, her opulent apartment seized to cover initial claims, and her name became synonymous with corporate malfeasance. She found herself ostracized from the very elite circles she had so desperately sought to impress, her career in tatters, her future bleak and shadowed by legal battles. The cold, calculating efficiency she had prided herself on had ultimately led to her own utter ruin. She had sacrificed human dignity for profit, and in the end, lost everything that truly mattered. Caspian Sterling's descent was equally precipitous, though perhaps more agonizing in its prolonged agony. Stripped of his granduncle's favor and, crucially, his immense financial backing, his privileged world imploded with a resounding crash. His credit lines were revoked, his luxury cars repossessed, his exclusive club memberships cancelled, and his lavish lifestyle became an unaffordable relic of a past that seemed to mock him. His social circle, built solely on his family's name and his presumed inheritance, evaporated overnight, revealing the chilling shallowness of his connections. The friends who had once fawned over him now avoided his calls, unwilling to be associated with a pariah. He was no longer the charming, ambitious heir, but a pariah, a cautionary tale of entitlement and arrogance, a ghost haunting the corridors of his former life. He raged, he pleaded, he tried to appeal to Augustus's sentimental side, recalling childhood memories, but the old man remained unyielding, his gaze firm and resolute. Caspian, who had treated lower-level employees with utter contempt, suddenly found himself stripped of his own power and reduced to nothing more than a cautionary footnote in the Sterling legacy. He had believed wealth and status were his birthright, an inherent part of his being, only to discover that they were merely loans, subject to recall by the true owner, and now he stood naked and exposed, without the gilded cage to protect him. Meanwhile, for Alara, the empathetic intern, the events were nothing short of a surreal dream. She had been sitting in the back of the ballroom, initially confused by Arthur's strange interruption, then utterly stunned by the dramatic reveal. When Augustus Sterling, the formidable founder, called her name and beckoned her forward, she felt a wave of dizzying disbelief, a sudden spotlight shining on her humble existence. She had always simply tried to do her best, to be kind, never expecting recognition for such basic human decency. "Alara," Augustus had said, his voice kind, a stark contrast to the thunder he had just unleashed on Regina and Caspian, his eyes holding a profound respect. "You represent the true heart of what Ethelred Holdings was, and what it will be again. Your kindness, your respect for every individual, regardless of their position, did not go unnoticed. It was a beacon in the darkness." He offered her not just a job, but a direct mentorship under his personal guidance. He offered her a substantial scholarship to complete her business degree, a generous trust fund to ensure her financial security, and a position in a newly created ethics and employee welfare department, tasked with rebuilding the company's internal culture from the ground up, a department that would embody the true values of Ethelred. Alara, initially overwhelmed, her eyes welling with tears of gratitude and awe, tearfully accepted. She was not driven by greed, but by a genuine desire to make a difference, to heal the wounds inflicted by avarice. She had never dreamed of such an opportunity, having simply strived to do good where she could, seeing the worth in every person. She had seen the despair in Martha's and George's eyes, and now, she would be instrumental in ensuring such injustices would never happen again. Her kindness, offered freely and without expectation of reward, had opened doors she never knew existed, doors to a future she could scarcely have imagined, proving that true value resided not in power, but in compassion. Months later, Ethelred Holdings was a company reborn. The initial shockwaves had subsided, replaced by a tangible sense of renewal, a palpable shift in the corporate atmosphere. Augustus Sterling, having dismantled the corrupt structures from within, now focused on rebuilding, meticulously restoring the ethical foundations he had so carefully laid decades ago. He remained the chairman, but he had stepped back from the day-to-day grind, entrusting more to a new generation of leadership, particularly to Alara, whose fresh perspective and unwavering ethics were exactly what the company needed. He found a profound peace in knowing he had purged the rot and ensured his legacy would endure, not as a monument to profit, but to principles. He would often visit the offices, no longer as Arthur, but as himself, yet he would always greet the janitorial staff and security guards by name, a quiet nod of respect for the unseen backbone of his empire, a reminder that their dignity was paramount. Alara, now a rising star within Ethelred, thrived in her new role. She spearheaded initiatives that truly put employees first, from revitalized pension plans and fair wage policies to comprehensive mental health support and opportunities for professional growth. She championed Martha, ensuring her a comfortable retirement with full benefits, and George, who chose to remain, was promoted to a supervisory role, his years of loyal service finally recognized and rewarded, his pride restored. Alara, despite her rapid ascent, remained humble, her empathy undimmed by success. She remembered the kindness Arthur had shown her, unaware of his true identity, and carried that spirit forward, proving that true leadership stemmed from compassion, not just competence or ruthlessness. The story of Augustus Sterling, the billionaire disguised as a janitor, became an enduring legend, a modern fable whispered in corporate boardrooms and break rooms alike, inspiring both fear and hope. It served as a potent, if somewhat discomforting, reminder that character reveals itself not in the light of prosperity, but in the shadows of anonymity. For true worth is measured not by the titles one holds or the wealth one accumulates, but by the kindness extended when no one is watching, and the integrity maintained when all eyes are averted. In the end, good deeds, like seeds sown in fertile ground, always find a way to blossom, while the thorns of greed inevitably prick the hands that cultivate them, leaving behind only the bitter taste of ruin. It was a stark lesson, learned through an old man's disguise, that the true face of humanity is unveiled not when the spotlight shines brightest, but when the world believes no one is looking. If this tale of hidden identities and moral revelations captivated you, remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next compelling story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think Augustus should have done differently? Have you ever witnessed someone's true character revealed in an unexpected way? Share your stories in the comments below.